Welcome everyone to the latest episode of WHU Inside Business. Today we are here for a very special episode on Wirecard, which I'm sure all of our viewers will be more than familiar with, especially in Germany and if you've been investing in the stocks market there. I'm joined tonight by Laura McCracken and Jörn Leogrande. Just as a small introduction, Laura, you've had a very distinct background in financial services and technology businesses and was EVP at Wirecard running their financial institution and fintech platform just before 2020. And Jörn Leogrande, you obviously have a very distinct marketing background, had several EVP roles in Wirecard, and so quite a bit of a firm, having joined the business in 2006. And I'd love to get both of your perspectives on what Wirecard was like as a business before certain events. Jörn, perhaps given that your tenure with the business, might you go first and just give us your perspective on working there?
Yeah, so I joined Wirecard in the year 2005 as a freelancer, mostly in marketing. I can say it was not any special company. It was like I would say a tech company, outskirts of Munich, 100 people. So nothing about this kind of stardom or global company that was in the last phase. So it was very much a tech company, and the purpose was really to facilitate payments in the online space. And it was very clear from the beginning. It was the early days of the internet that online gambling or entertainment was kind of in the middle of this, right? But what you could feel from the very beginning, because I think CEO Dr. Markus Braun and Jan Marschalek, the CEO that is now vanished from this world, were there at that time, and you could see and feel that they wanted to, I would say, create a big global story from the very beginning.
And Laura, having joined the firm much more recently, what was your take kind of coming into at that time quite successful business?
Well, the reason I joined was because it was pretty exciting. I mean, I was the global EVP of Fintech and financial services. And Wirecard kind of famously launched the likes of Revolut and N26 and Curve and Cecil Pay because, Wirecard had both issuing and acquiring, and it allowed some of these players to leverage their licenses, e-money licenses, as well as their banking licenses to launch. And so I was really excited about that because I'm just a big, huge fan of fintech. I've been in payments all my life with big companies like Amazon and Facebook. But this was a chance for me to work with small fintechs and help to incubate them. So I was excited. I think that the culture was buzzy. But yes, I'm sure you're going to ask me more questions about when I started seeing some signs. And I did start seeing some little indications that might have been a bit scary in my first 6 months before the downfall.
Before we dive into that, I'd love to understand a little bit more about that cultural aspect, because a lot of time culture is the first sign. And obviously, having been at both Amazon, Meta, but also the likes of City and Amex back in the early days, you might have a quite interesting view and perspective on it. What was Wirecard like at the beginning?
I'll let you start, Jörn.
Oh gosh, I think the company really clearly has a development, right? In the earlier days, it was, I think, not very international, right? It was pretty German or European facing and stuff like this. And over the years, the company grew much more to, I would say, international company, like really a lot of teams. They had like 80 to 90% of people from foreign countries and stuff like this. So this was kind of super interesting to see this company like evolving from this, I would say, very more local or regional tech hub into something much bigger, right? And the culture with that evolving from a very local thing to a very international and very buzzy, I would say, corporate culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's a lot of, what I remembered the most was the can-do attitude. It was a deal-making culture. I was actually reporting into Jörn, and he was a deal maker extraordinaire. I didn't realize how much of what he was really doing behind the scenes, but it was he was good at bringing different people together. And so what I saw was a very entrepreneurial company, deal making culture, and so I was really looking forward to joining. And I was also I knew about the concerns that were raised by the FT before joining. I have to say that I did read up on that, but my fears were kind of allayed by, BaFin, because I know BaFin's a very conservative company or conservative regulator, and I thought that, they'd probably investigated it and checked it out, and it gave me comfort that it was just mismanagement. I thought that there was probably a lot of, I could see this is another important point. I thought it was almost like a teenager that had grown up too quickly. So I felt that the company had a lot of magic, a lot of gold dust, but it had grown so rapidly that it didn't have some good processes in place to really improve the management quality. So I thought that's what I was there to do, is kind of help turn that around.
I mean, as the saying goes, hindsight is always 2020. I'd love to understand now, with a view back, were there some signs? Obviously, you mentioned the FT article being one obvious one, but and Jörn, perhaps you'll be able to give a good view on this as well, having spent quite significant time with the stakeholders in question. Were there some signs behind the scene that could have pointed towards what's going to happen?
For me, the first sign I saw was I was confused about my job. So I was one of 4 EVPs running a P&L. And my P&L was, let's say it was 100 million that was what we were currently doing with financial services or fintech. And I was thinking to myself, wow, it's a 2 billion revenue company, and they're hiring me as one EVP to do $100 million business or euro business. So I felt that I needed to catch up to my colleagues, but I was never able to see what they were doing. So the first thing I noticed was a lack of transparency, because I kept saying, I want to see the big picture. How do I fit into the retail or the travel or the digital business? And no one would show me that. And I remember at one point I was kind of banging my head on the table saying, this is not normal. I should be able to see what my colleagues are doing so I can learn from them, if nothing else, right?
Absolutely. Jörn, what's your perspective?
Yeah, the perspective was, if you were longer with the company, right, you had the feeling that there are certain edges or areas that you better not take a deeper look at, right? Questions were not answered, and especially when it comes to this third-party payment business, right? I remember there were meetings with the controlling about this, right? But you cannot, these kind of super merchants creating this enormous amount of revenue. It was not clear who these guys were, what kind of merchants, how you secure this. They were not running on Wirecard systems. So I think for the people who were longer with Wirecard, they were always thinking, okay, maybe someone took the initial business like online gambling, right, and adult entertainment to and outsourced it to some external facility, right, which would make sense from the perspective of a DAX company, which was since 2018. So we had the feeling that is something that is not visible for us actually. But I don't know. We questioned this, but we never got any answers on this. And in the end, I think in a lot of banks, there are some areas where where there is no, visibility on the details actually.
It's interesting, this common theme of growing questions going unanswered. It does raise, I think, some questions around both corporate responsibility, but also to a degree employee responsibility and spotting the signs. Now, if we go back to when it happened and the news kind of broke, how did you react both as individuals, but also you were running quite significant P&Ls and people responsibilities? I mean, how did you break the news to some of your colleagues, the interactions after that? Laura, if you want to go first.
We didn't really have to break it to them because everybody saw the same thing. I mean, it was the thing. I was almost in disbelief when the report came out from KPMG, and all along our leadership had such confidence that things were going well. And they kept telling me, I felt the worst thing is I was conveying some of those same positive messages to my partners, MasterCard. I was saying, it looks like things are going really well. We're supposed to get the report from KPMG soon. Apparently it's going well. It's all moving in the right direction. We can give you comfort like in April. So I was personally putting my own name on the line. And then when the paper came out, I think all of us read the report from KPMG and we were kind of thinking, it's not an exoneration. So we were waiting for it, didn't come. And then we all listened to this thing that's quite famous now. I think everyone's seen it, the town hall, where our leadership all said, we've been exonerated. And we were all thinking, really? So I don't think I had to say that much to my team. I think it was more about how do we go from here? What do we do from here? And for regular employees, there was a process to follow in terms of bankruptcy. And as we went down that path and we had to find people new homes. And so that's more of a process driven thing. But the emotional thing was just this sense of feeling like we kind of betrayed. We've been totally betrayed. And we all shared with our partners and our people in the external world and our family and friends what we believed to be true and wasn't true.
No, absolutely. Jörn, what was your perspective?
Yeah, as a more long-term Wirecard employee, you could see there are certain, every 2 years, right, there were a new scandal, right? Since 2008, when this all started, media was picking up on things, stock price was going down, the market's in panic, right? But then magically, after 2 or 3 months, the situation cleared. The stock price was going up again and stuff like this. So this was something as a Wirecard employee was kind of used to in a certain extent. And I remember that I think like 2 days before Ernst & Young was not testifying the annual report, I was having a meeting in Munich with some C-levels, and they were saying, oh, there might be some hiccups, right? But everything will run as we expected. So when I was looking at this, right, and I was very early on in the morning waiting for the results of the annual report, and it was not coming, I was really getting super nervous. And after the annual report was not coming, you think to yourself, oh, people need, or the auditors need a visibility on an account in the Philippines. Maybe someone is sending somebody over. And I remember like 2 days later, I was in a meeting with some EVPs and C-levels, and there was the first sign that somebody saying, but the money is not there, right? And if the money is not there, this is something else. It's like a criminal thing. It's a new dimension. This was really a shock.
It's fascinating looking back. I mean, just the amount of disbelief on the investor landscape, but also just the general public, and how that obviously affected the business going forward. Laura, you were quite involved with the efforts that came later with Banco Santander. Mm-hmm. How did that affect both in terms of the employee on the ground, the culture, but really just the overarching organization? I think our viewers would love to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, well, I feel like my career with Wirecard was threefold. So the first part was the one we've been talking about so far, where I was leading the Fintech. The second piece was more the investigation. So before Santander came around, the acting CEO came to me and said, "Can you sit on these boards and help us to figure out what to do with them?" Because basically, the first thing he did when he came in as acting. James Freese became acting CEO, he suspended almost everybody. Anyone who'd been around for a long time and was in a position where he thought maybe they could have known or should have known, he just suspended them all. And then he, one by one, tried to decide who he could bring back. And since I was new, he put me on those boards to do that investigation. So that was probably the most uncomfortable part, because people then are suspicious of you and your motives, So I was really trying to figure out how I could bring some of the, the people who had just been unwittingly had the wool pulled over their eyes. How could I bring them back into the fold to help us solve the problems? So then it was, after investigating and bringing people back, then it was about figuring out, what do we do with the business? Do we sell it? Do we divest it? How do we'd have to talk to all of the regulatory bodies, all the investigators. We were still having office raids that we were dealing with on a daily basis. We were trying to figure out where the flow of funds went. We were looking back at old contracts, saying, like, were these valid contracts, not valid contracts? We were having to lay off employees. That was a good, gosh, I want to say 6 months of just firefighting before the Santander thing come along. And then when Santander came along, it was like we found a home, but it was not as easy as you'd imagine, because Santander still had they liked the people that they were getting. They took 500 people and they took the technology, but they didn't want to take any customers because they didn't want to be tainted with the idea of, good customers versus fake customers. They just left that to the side and just focused on the people and the technology that was real.
No, it's fascinating. Obviously, the transformation there was a gigantic effort. So very well done, Jörn. I guess from your perspective, having been a little bit less involved in that, quite a lot of employees like yourself, both in leadership position, took some time to do some soul searching. And I guess, what's your perspective on sitting it from a different perspective? Wirecard, or what's left of it now versus before? Have you got a view on that?
So I, as I said beforehand, I was dropping out of the company like in August. So Santander, it was very clear that Santander didn't have any use for me and my team, actually. In this area, this small amount of months that I spent in this kind of transformation process, what struck me like afterwards is how pragmatic everybody was reacting, right? There was no aggressiveness, there were no questions. Everybody was like, okay, there's a problem, insolvency, now let's solve it, right? But nobody was saying something, even to C-level, saying something like, how does it turn out, right? What have you done? What have you noticed, and stuff like this? So it was kind of a very, very pragmatic atmosphere. And afterwards, looking back, I thought to myself, why was nobody standing up and asking like questions, right? And kind of, okay, now we have a problem, we solve it, right? Something like this kind of attitude. And going back to these months, right? I sometimes think maybe it would be good to, raise some questions about responsibilities also in this process. But it was very much driven by necessities of the insolvency process.
And it's interesting to apply this post-mortem sense of analysis to entire events. I mean, one of the questions asked by analysts is, did Wirecard really need to make up for the fraudulent revenues? What would have been the company's trajectory if the events didn't unfold? Laura, I'd love to get your perspective on this.
Well, I think it's funny because I think they never had to make up revenues. Obviously, they never had to make, but it's kind of one of those things where I think it starts small. I'm trying to imagine this. I don't have proof of this, but I imagine that at one point there were a couple of players saying like, listen, we just need to show, in order to get this loan from this bank or get this deal done, we've got a deal in the pipeline. So I bet it started small, but then they got away with it. And then it started increasing in scope. And then once you're starting to get into the limelight and people are seeing that you're successful, and they were loving, we were Germany's darling Fintech, so that everybody was rooting for them to win. And I think that once you start with that drug, you just keep feeding the beast, because you're seeing the growth is there. You want to keep it going. And I think that they hoped they could win their way out of it. I think they hoped that with the hype and the publicity and the deals that we are actually legitimately were winning, that they could win their way out of it. But
yeah, no, it's difficult looking back. Jörn, what's your view on it?
I think the situation for me, like very subjective, right? It began in the year 2010 when the US was closing down all online gambling efforts, right? And this was a big thing. Before this, it was pretty clear that Wirecard was doing a lot in the US. FBI was closing down now everything. And now you have like two chances, right? You can tell the market, the investors, okay, we have a little bit of a problem here, right? Or which some payment companies obviously did at the time, right? But there's another option where they say we need like 30% growth, like every quarter, every year, and something like this. And now you start looking around. I'm with Laura. It is like small steps that you take, right? Maybe like intermediate solutions that you are looking for, and you think you can come back, right? So I remember for 5 or 6 years I was working like on a day-by-day basis with Jan Maschalek, and he was constantly engaged in like getting new customers, especially for mobile wallets. He was everywhere, right? But after a while, in the year 2015 or something, it was clear that they could not find a solution to create this magic, stream of revenue, and maybe they lost it there, right? And see that they organically you cannot go into this kind of growth rates. And I was always also talking a lot to the analysts, right? And I was always wondering in a part of my head, right? This company has like growth rates of 30 to 40%, like every year, like every month, even Amazon is not doing something like this, or even Apple are not the biggest tech companies in the world. But there's a company from Aschheim that is magically, right, magically doing what nobody else is succeeding, right? And so, yeah.
And obviously the fallout was quite significant, both at the society layer. But before we jump into that, I'd love to just understand a little bit more about the personal consequences and really how it shaped your career going forward. Laura, obviously you've since joined the board and joined Accenture, and Jörn, you've become a CMO in a different organization. I'd love to kind of understand the discussions you've had with employers, with colleagues, with the broader network after the events unfolded. Laura, would you like to go first?
For me, I think it's one of my career highlights. I mean, people all felt sorry for me. They're like, "Oh, poor Laura, I'm so sorry for you. Are you okay? Are you all right?" I said, first of all, I'm learning something new every day. During that crisis period when we were firefighting, I learned more in that 4 to 6 month period than you learn in any other situation, because it's easy to show up on a board when you've got all your papers in order and everything's running smoothly, tickety-boo, and it's a safe environment where there are processes in place. That's easy. But when things are crashing around you left, right, and center, that's when you actually learn, and that's when you figure out what you're made of. And I am proud of myself for one thing. So I was told by a lot of people, don't get on those boards, don't do it. By so many of my mentors saying, just don't do it, because you'll have to explain it the rest of your life. And I thought, well, you know what? If I don't do it, who's going to do it? I was well placed to do it. I thought, I'm going to learn. And I can't believe that anyone in the future is going to blame me for what happened when I was trying to be part of the solution. So I just dove in and I did it. And I'm glad I did. Because then when I interviewed for my job with the board that I'm also on, I'm on a regulated board right now. So I had to go through with AIG Life UK. I had to go through lots of vetting with the PRA and the FCA. And then they were satisfied that I brought something to the table, because I told them I've seen the best and I've seen the worst. And who do you want to sit on a board? Someone who's only seen things going smoothly? Or do you want someone to sit on your board that's actually seen what happens when things go wrong and can see the signs?
And obviously you've since joined Accenture as well. How do your clients, now that you've gone and moved on to more of an advisory capacity, how do your clients react? I'm sure it's at the very least quite an interesting anecdote to share with them.
Well, they don't. They do find it interesting. It's good, dinner conversation. But they're more interested in kind of what I've done throughout the entirety of my career, which was payments at American Express and Citibank and Amazon and Facebook, because I'm focusing on social commerce. So they want me to focus on their problems and their issues. For the Wirecard stuff is just kind of like a little blip for them. That's like, oh yeah, let's have a cup of coffee and hear a little bit more about your stuff. But I don't help them to replicate that experience for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and obviously you've now joined DMO, quite an interesting business, but you've also published the books. I'd love to kind of understand a little bit more what life's been after Wirecard for you.
Yeah, it was not so streamlined, right? I saw a lot of my colleagues; they were just jumping in the next, I would say, career move, right? Some of them were getting rid on Wirecard on LinkedIn, and the story was closed, right? I decided to write this book, right? And I always, also during my time, because I was a journalist when in my early days, so I thought to myself, it might be a good story from the inside. And then I started writing the book, and I did it for 4 months actually. And then after this, I was totally underestimating. I don't know. I never thought what was happening after I finished the book. So I was then, I think I was running in a lot of legal, discussions and stuff like this with some of the people who are involved in the entire Wirecard disaster and stuff like this. And initially, I thought to myself, I don't want to go back into fintech, right? As much as I liked it, it was kind of, I thought to myself, maybe this is not the way forward. So I worked in the food industry as a consultant on innovation and stuff like this. But nowadays, I did go back, and actually because it's my home turf, right? Because I know a lot of this. I built a lot of solutions and stuff like this. But I try to find a different edge in my work now. Maybe if you can, create something that helps people based on payment, living a better life, and stuff like this. So taking a bit of different approach to it. But with the book and all this documentation thing that comes next, I think I have to tell the Wirecard story for a pretty long time over lunch and dinner. And it's my fault, right?
No, absolutely.
You're such a good storyteller, though, Jörn. We need you.
It is kind of, I sometimes think maybe moving on, right, would be a much healthier decision, just to be involved in all of this. Yeah. But anyway, I mean, this seems to be the story of my life.
But taking a step back and analyzing the effects on fintech, both in terms of dramatic impact, specifically around BaFin. I mean, I can tell you from the executive search standpoint, requests for chief risk and chief compliance officers are through the roof. What's your take on it in terms of, both from a regulatory standpoint, but also for other fintechs? I'd love to get your perspective. Jörn, perhaps if you want to go first on this one.
The crazy thing is, after the collapse of Wirecard, I was thinking, this fintech bubble or this fintech development will come to an end, right? And it struck me really that by surprise that what Markus Braun, the CEO of Wirecard, was foreseeing, right? That there will be companies with 100 billion market valuation or something. It's really happening, right? So I think the development in fintech, or the growth rates in fintech, were going on for quite some while, actually. And nobody was also questioning the valuations and stuff like this. So in my view, right? Only now, I think that this after COVID and with the war situation, what we see is the beginning of a bit of a downfall when it comes to fintech. But I think the entire fintech world was looking at Wirecard, was like shaking a bit and then moving on.
Back to business in a way. Laura, what's your take on that?
Well, one thing I noticed is there's less trust between governments. So I saw, the UK suddenly. It used to be okay to safeguard your funds in certain big banks in Germany or other countries, but suddenly the walls came up, and I think that I saw that like the UK, for example, said, we want you to safeguard your funds in the UK. So there's just a little bit less trust between regulators at the moment. I don't know if that's gotten better, but I just saw that initially right afterwards. But otherwise, I don't think that it's dampened anything in fintechs. I think that people are a little bit wiser, but I also think people have very short memories, because there are times I see other companies that I'm like, that company looks a little dodgy, but people don't. They just don't. They always believe that. They always assume positivity. Almost. They always, when they see a company, they assume that, its leaders are legit, and they still don't. So maybe they haven't completely learned the lessons of the past to ask more critical questions.
No, it's certainly interesting insight, and I think I would agree with the sentiment. There's definitely a move towards normalities to a degree. Quite a lot has happened since then. And two last questions from my side. One, of course, looking back and sort of in a summary statement, do you regret having joined Wirecard in the first place, or what's your take on it, Laura? If you want to kick us off on that one.
If I knew what I knew now, then the obvious answer is I would never have joined Wirecard. I mean, I just wouldn't have done it. But I didn't know what I do now. I'm at the moment, I think it was overall an amazing learning experience. So I don't have regrets. I never have regrets in life, though. Never. I always find a way to turn a negative thing into a positive.
It's a great attitude to have. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't regret it, right? I think when I started, I was like a freelancer and something like this. So I think always I was looking for some kind of developing, some kind of bigger infrastructure, some kind of team, right? And mission or something. So Wirecard was a very, very interesting and long-term experience for me, right? And like Laura, I don't think we should regret something like this. So it was a very negative experience in the end, right? But within all these years, right, the people that I've met, the project that we've done, right, I think it had a lot of also positive sense, right, for me personally. So no regrets from my side.
No, thank you very much for taking the time. I'm sure our viewers found the conversations insightful, and it's great to take that insight perspective and analyze into a lot more detail. So from both our viewers and our team here at WHU Inside Business, thank you so much for joining us today.